Whoa. Where are you guys going?
We're going after them.
Who is them?
Wait, he must be one of them. Yeah!
Hey guys, Drag Queen Story Hour here. Populism is one of the most misunderstood and nebulously defined political terms ever. It seems like nobody knows what it means, but everybody has some kind of guttural reaction to it. I hear if you utter the term around a centrist, they'll shrivel up and die. Then, they'll ask you what the word means. But what if I told you that populism wasn't a very scary word at all, and that you, my liberal viewer pretending to be a political extremist for fun and profit, probably already support some populist causes. That's right, populism is good, actually. Most of you know this already, but for those of you that don't, here's a crash course. Populism is, according to several rigorously cross-checked studies, a range of political stances that emphasize the idea of the people juxtaposed against that of the elite. Oh, oops, I was actually just reading that off of Wikipedia. Let's keep going. Populism isn't an ideology. It's how to ideology. Populism is simply a way that ideologies manifest in the real world, and because of this, there are many different kinds of populism. You've probably already heard of left-wing populism and right-wing populism, but in this video we're going to deconstruct those terms and figure out what they really mean. I myself am an anti-centrist populist, also called a populist without adjectives. Also without adjectives is not an adjective. Don't think about it too much. Populist movements typically have leaders, and these populist leaders are typically smeared by libs as demagogues. In the States, the best-known examples of populists on the left are people like AOC and Bernie Sanders, and the populists on the right are people like Donald Trump and friends. Populist leaders tend to be charismatic. They either position themselves as outsiders because they actually are outsiders, or because they're trying to make themselves look like outsiders, to demonize their political opponents as people who are part of an establishment or an elite that is not working for the people. So who are the elites? Well, elites is a flexible term. Hedge fund managers are elites, but so are politicians and bankers, and even celebrities. Anyone who occupies a position of power, or is perceived to occupy a position of power, can be marked as an elite. Whether these people occupy power or don't isn't important. What's important is the story being told. And if the story says that these people are elite and that they control power, then it is a populist movement. Populism often crops up in response to a system's failings. Again, this isn't about the system's material failings. This is about the appearance of failure within the system. The reason populist leaders direct their rage at a group of elites is because it's a lot easier to direct a large swath of human beings to do something when you have a group of people to blame. The kind of populism we're talking about depends directly on the kinds of elites that are being blamed. This brings us to left-wing and right-wing populism. Very broadly, left-wing populists, or what we typically call left-wing populists, fight against people who are seen to have too much economic power. These are the super rich and the politicians that enable the super rich. Meanwhile, on the right, the elites that they blame are the Jews. The established left. So basically how this manifests in the West is you'll get people going against academia, a lot of leftists in academia, which often actually makes right-wing populism very frequently an anti-intellectual movement. And in Hollywood and other places that have a lot of cultural capital. The primary defining aspect of right-wing populism is anti-immigration. Popularity of populists in the modern day is consistently underrepresented by a bumbling mainstream media with no critical thinking ability other than to blindly support the status quo. The issue is that populism is almost always a threat to the status quo, and so the forces that control the status quo will often push against it. This is often the case, but not always. Certain kinds of populism can be adopted and integrated into the status quo relatively harmlessly. When we talk about left-wing populism, we typically only talk about the economic aspect of left-wing populism. But we could conceivably think of a culturally left-wing populism. Same thing with the right wing. When we talk about right-wing populism, we're talking about anti-immigration, disdain for Hollywood elite, concern for cultural homogeneity. All of those things are culturally right-wing issues. So what about the economic right wing? You could say Trump was economically right wing, but that's not why he was a populist. He was a populist because of the cultural issues that none of the other Republicans wanted to touch on, really. Same thing with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders ran specifically on the economically left-wing issues. Yeah, he was culturally left-wing too, but that wasn't the point. That wasn't why he was a populist. It was the economic issues. Economically left-wing populism and culturally right-wing populism. That's what we mean when we say left-wing and right-wing populism. Those are the features of those populisms that stand out. Populism just tends to be authoritarian. That's what happens when you have a demagogue provide simple solutions to problems. It becomes more on the authoritarian spectrum. Populism isn't just moving up on a political compass. It's much more complicated. And to give you an example of that, let's talk about Libertarian Populism. Libertarian Populism is basically this idea that if you're a libertarian, right, how do you get the people on your side here? Like, economically right-wing, if you're an ANCAP, let's say, what does an ANCAP populist movement look like when not everybody owns capital? Or when not everybody has a lot of capital? Libertarian populism is this idea that instead of libertarians basically just representing billionaires and people with a lot of money, it shifts from that being the focus to the focus mainly being the middle class. Most people, anyone earning money really, against a corrupt, bloated government. This leads us to culturally left-wing populism. Now, I want you to use your brain here. There is something very relevant going on right now that is a clear example of culturally left-wing populism, okay? I'm gonna give you a minute to think about it, but I'll give you a hint. It's happening on Twitter. Did you guess cancel culture? That's right. Now hear me out here. You've probably never heard cancel culture described as a populist movement, but if you look at what cancel culture is, it fits all the requirements pretty well. In this case, the elite are the celebrity. The culturally left-wing populists and the culturally right-wing populists are both targeting the celebrities, but for very different reasons. The culturally right-wing populists are targeting them because most Hollywood celebrities, most people who are in culturally elite positions tend to be left-wing politically. That's the only reason. This is a clear example of decentralized, culturally left-wing populism. Celebrities have all the social capital, and so to be a celebrity in a time of populism is to be in danger. Look, you may not like it, but a Twitter mob ravenously devouring one celebrity and then looking with hungry eyes onto the next is a form of populism. And as a pro-populist, I have to say, based? That's right. Cancel culture is good, actually. Yes, I will die on this hill. And if you check back on this video in a couple of years, I probably have already died on this hill. One thing that's important to note about this example, called cancel culture as populism, is that there is no leader. No one specific person, choosing who's getting canceled. It's just a force, and maybe one person makes one tweet, and then another person makes a tweet, another person makes a tweet, and it just snowballs into a cancellation. But it's very different from what you normally have to expect from populism, which is a demagogue, or someone that someone calls a demagogue, shows up and amasses all this anger, and then they are the one to carry out the action. It's typically more of an authoritarian thing. Cancel culture doesn't need a leader. Instead, the internet has allowed people to create spontaneous populism out of thin air. It used to be, back in my day, you had to find a politician to rouse people, and then they had to use those people to funnel their power through him, and he was the conduit that populism sprung from. Nowadays, you don't necessarily need that. The internet is that conduit. And so these forms of decentralized, libertarian, anti-authoritarian populism are now possible because of the internet. So that covers all the main kinds of populism, but there are other forms of populism that are emerging that are very interesting to look at from a political perspective. One of my good friends, Giorgio Iacatura, personal mentor of mine before he died a few years ago, he started this party in Italy called the 5-Star Movement. The 5-Star Movement is a good example of something that is not easily defined as left-wing or right-wing populism. It's a mixture. For example, the movement is anti-immigration, and you might think immediately that makes it a right-wing populist party, but it's also pro-e-democracy, public water, environmentalism, right to internet access, direct democracy, and non-violence. That sort of makes you think that maybe it's more left-wing, but then it's also Eurosceptic, and it doesn't like the EU at all. Now, this is very interesting. It's not a clearly left-wing or right-wing populist party. It's Something you might even call just a populist party, period. No adjectives. But it still had leaders. Giorgio Yakitura was one of them, of course. And it still used political figures as conduits for the frustrations of the people. Now keep that in mind as I go on to our final example here. Gamestock. What's going on with Gamestock, huh? As I speak, the stock is soaring again. And whether or not this ends up being a successful attempt against the elites, the narrative is already there. So this is populism. In this case, the elite are targeted people from Wall Street, the hedge fund managers. This was undeniably an act of populism. The people scoped out the elite and then en masse rose up against it. Notice here that when you say the people, the elite are not people, they are the them class. And that means we can just like the 5-star movement, this is a scenario where there are both left-wing and right-wing people supporting the cause. So when notable left-wing and right-wing figures both support a form of populism, then what form of populism is it? It's my form of populism, baby! Oh, yeah! Fuck the adjectives, we're going in! This is an example of a populism without adjectives sort of event happening that doesn't have a leader. Again, the internet was the conduit for a decentralized form of populism to rise up, no leader, no conduit needed, and then attack the elites. There you have it. Those are all the kinds of populism. The left-wing kinds, the right-wing kinds, and the kinds that prove our traditional models of politics are out-of-date relics, and that most people actually pretty much want the same things. If you look past the petty and artificial divides propped up by the elites to keep us squabbling amongst ourselves instead of focused on them, and we should be looking to work with our fellow humans as much as possible instead of looking for reasons to fight amongst ourselves. Because when we look for common ground, those positions that everybody actually knows and wants and then likes, real change can happen a lot quicker than focusing on those disagreements that we have between people. We can make change a lot easier and quicker if we're looking for common ground amongst all people instead of the small divisions between us. And working together might be the best kind of populism of all. What? No. No, that's not right. No. I'm a centrist now. I got to talk about Gamestock. It ended up being relevant because it went back up.